So welcome everyone to our launch today. So we're launching arts and cultural participation among 17-year-olds in Ireland. And of course, this is a joint ESRI Arts Council event. And it's a great pleasure to welcome everybody along today. So I guess there's been a lot of coverage of the study already in the media. But we're going to enjoy anyway a presentation in a few minutes from my colleague, the lead author of the report, Emer Smyth. Then later on, we'll have some comments from Maureen Kennelly, who is, of course, the director of the Arts Council, and she's going to give some responses to the report, and then we'll have some more contributions from described as young people in my briefing note here in front of me. This is Eoin O Loughlin and Abubakar, who will both be talking in a little while. So that was certainly a very interesting and different start to an ESRI event. I really enjoyed it. So with that, I think I'll just hand over to Emer. So Emer, you can join us, and I guess you'll share your screen then as well.
Thank you. So I would like to start by thanking the Arts Council for funding the study. Maureen is here with us today, and I would also like to thank Shona Nivreen, who has been a real supporter of this research and the research on which it builds. I would also like to thank Noon, who will be contributing today, and I would like to thank Eoin, who will be talking to you later as well. None of this would have been possible without the Growing Up in Ireland study, because I'm using Growing Up in Ireland data. So I'd like to say my thanks to the GUI study team and the young people and their families who took the time to contribute to the study. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the background to the study, about the patterns of participation in arts and culture at 17 years of age, something about schools and their role in cultural participation, and the impact that cultural participation has on young people's outcomes. And I'm going to finish by saying a little bit about implications for policy and practice. I'm sure that's a theme Maureen will come back to. Now, this study builds on an earlier study also founded by the Arts Council on arts and cultural participation among this group of young people at the age of 9 and 13. And that earlier study actually also looked at those who were at preschool stage and looked at their participation in a different range of arts and cultural activities. We adopt a broad definition of cultural participation. So it includes traditional definitions like playing a musical instrument, taking music, drama, or dance lessons. It also includes reading for pleasure and digital culture, so screen time and also playing computer games. So in this presentation, I'm drawing on Growing Up in Ireland data on over 6,000 young people who were surveyed at 17 or 18 years of age. For convenience, I'm going to talk about them as 17-year-olds because it gets a bit clunky. And we also collected information from their families and schools, so we can place them very much in that context. It's important because this is a key transition period for these young people. About half of them are in their Leaving Cert year, around a third are in 5th year of senior cycle, and about 1 in 6 have already left school at the time of the survey. And it's important because this might set the tone for their engagement after leaving school in arts and culture. Now, the study set out to address 3 research questions. How does cultural participation at 17 vary by gender, family background, migrant status, and whether the young person has a special educational need? The second question focused on how young people access the arts at school, because most of them were still at school at the time of the survey, and whether this varied by the type of school they attended. And thirdly, I looked at whether cultural participation had an impact on cognitive skills, such as the vocabulary and their academic performance at school, and non-cognitive outcomes, such as self-esteem and socio-emotional well-being. So to start off by just giving you a flavour of the patterns of participation at 17 years of age. So this slide shows a selection of some of the most common activities in which 17-year-olds engaged. So you can see that actually the most frequent activity, and it's a cultural activity, was listening to music. So the vast majority of young people listen to music several times a week or weekly. Other very common activities were surfing the internet and hanging out with friends. But we can see that young people are less likely to engage in some of the other cultural activities. So if you look down at singing or playing a musical instrument, it's a significant proportion, but it's around a third. So it's less common than some of the other activities, including team sports. And we see that fewer young people again engage in reading for pleasure on a regular basis. So around a fifth of them read several times a week or weekly. Regular cinema going is very uncommon, though the majority of young people go to the cinema at least occasionally. So on the next slide, I look in further detail at the characteristics of young people who engage in these different activities. So this shows young people who sing or play a musical instrument at least weekly. It distinguishes between males in blue and females in red, and it's broken down into 4 social groups: professional, managerial, non-manual, working class, and what are called non-employed. So this is a group whose parents are quite distant from the labour market. They're long-term unemployed, or they're economically inactive because they're disabled or on home duties. So this group can't be assigned a social class category in the traditional way, and they're a very disadvantaged group. So there's 2 things I'd like you to notice here. First of all, the very significant gender gap across all of the social groups. So young women are much more likely to I'm getting a message that someone else is saying the slides are cut off. So Jean, maybe you could look at that. So I'll try and talk you through the patterns, even if you can't see this. Oh, Dorothy can see them. Okay, sorry about the technical glitches.
For that person, that could be they might be seeing you speaking at the side, and they can actually make that window smaller if they wanted to, I think.
Okay.
Problem.
Thank you. So there is a gender gap in participation in music making. We can also see that music making is more common, slightly more common for the more advantaged groups, especially for young women from professional and managerial families. And that actually participation among less advantaged women is actually more common than among more advantaged males. So if you like, gender trumps social background when it comes to involvement in music making. Now, when we move on to the same, to the next slide, we see the pattern for reading for pleasure at 17 years of age. If you could go down, Jean, thanks. It doesn't seem to be moving. Back, yeah, that's perfect. And again, we see very marked gender differences, except for the least advantaged group. So on the whole, young women are much more likely to read for pleasure at least weekly than young men. Again, we see a social gradient with the more privileged groups of young men and young women more likely to read for pleasure. And then we also see that even the more disadvantaged young women are more likely than advantaged young men to read for pleasure. So when we come to look at the other activities on the next slide, we see that involvement in what's called more structured cultural activities, so taking a music or drama or dance lesson, is also much more common among young women and those from more advantaged families. And this group of young women and more advantaged young people are less likely to engage in digital culture. So they spend less time on watching television or using the internet and playing computer games, at least on weekdays. And actually we find that cinema attendance is the only activity that's equally common across all social groups. For all the other activities, we see strong social differences. What's interesting is at 17, we see no difference between young people whose parents were born outside Ireland and their peers, or between young people with special educational needs and their peers. And that's very much in contrast to quite big gaps we saw at the age of 9 in particular. Now, unfortunately, as we go on to see, that's more because participation has fallen off among Irish groups and those without a special educational need, then because it's increased among those from migrant backgrounds or those with SEN. So a huge advantage of using Growing Up in Ireland data was that we could look at cultural participation at the ages of 9, 13 and 17 for the same young people. So we could really get a dynamic view of their participation. Now, what we find is that early involvement matters, that those who are involved in cultural activities at 9 and 13 are more likely to be involved at 17. But at the same time, we see a decline in all types of cultural participation between 13 and 17. And this decline was greatest for those in their Leaving Cert year and those who had already left school compared to those who were in 5th year. So there seem to be two factors going on here. First of all is that the Leaving Cert year is not surprisingly taken up with preparation for that exam. And so other activities are being squeezed out. And this includes arts and culture. And for those who have left school, that link with school has obviously been broken. And as we'd see later on, school is an important arena for access to the arts. So it seems to be that other activities don't make up for that after they leave school. The next chart shows that trend for reading for pleasure, and it's really dramatic. We can see that around a fifth of young people at 13 say they never read for pleasure. And then that rises to over half by the age of 17. So that's over half describe themselves as never reading for pleasure, which is a huge increase. But we also see on the next slide that that decrease and decline in cultural participation also applies to other forms of popular culture like TV and computer games. The young people had as well as being surveyed, they also completed time use diaries. And so this shows the average amount of time in minutes they spent on watching television and playing computer games on an average weekday. And we can see that both activities have declined between the ages of 13 and 17, particularly in terms of TV watching. Now I want to go on to talk a little bit about schools and their impact on cultural participation. Now, schools matter in two ways. They matter for access to arts and music as a curricular activity. So young people can study art and music for the Leaving Cert. But they also matter because schools provide extracurricular classes or activities that can allow students to engage in the arts. So just to talk about art and music, first of all, what's worth pointing out is that whether these are provided as school subjects varies very much by the type of school. So they're both more likely to be offered in larger schools, in fee-paying schools compared to other school types, and are more likely to be offered in girls' schools compared to coeducational or boys' schools. And overall, we find that young women are much more likely to take art and music for the Leaving Cert than young men. And music in particular is taken by more advantaged groups. So it's taken by those from professional managerial backgrounds, those who have graduate parents, and it's also taken by those from higher income families. Now, music is the only aspect of arts and culture that is directly affected by income that we find at 17. It mattered at younger ages for some activities, but this link between taking it as a Leaving Cert subject seems to be driven by really the need to engage in out of school instrumental tuition in order to be able to kind of really do well in the Leaving Cert. And finally, a really interesting pattern was that those who had taken transition year, even when you take account of the profile, are more likely to take art or music for the Leaving Cert than the other students. Now, in terms of extracurricular activities, this chart shows the proportion of schools who are offering choir, musical instrument tuition, drama or dance, either after school or during lunchtime. So it's outside the school day. It shows fee-paying schools, other non-DEIS schools and DEIS schools that cater for a more disadvantaged student population. So we can see two main things. We can see that fee-paying schools are more likely to provide all 4 types of cultural activities outside the school day. They have very high levels of provision of choir and musical instrument tuition. But when we compare DEIS schools with non-DEIS schools, the ones that aren't fee paying, we can actually see that DEIS schools are as likely or even more likely to provide extracurricular activities in the arts and culture than non-DEIS schools. And that's a really interesting and new finding. We also find that girls' schools are more likely to provide cultural activities outside the school day, as are larger schools. So it's really interesting then to note that DEIS schools are as likely as non-fee paying non-DEIS schools to provide arts and culture. And as a result, students in DEIS schools don't differ in their take-up of cultural lessons or clubs, all else being equal. And they're more likely than those of similar backgrounds in non-DEIS schools to say that second level education was a lot of help in their coming to appreciate arts and culture. So these are very new findings and present a kind of very positive picture of the impact that DEIS schools are having on the broader development of young people, including in the arts and culture. So I just want to say something briefly then about the influence of earlier participation in the arts and culture on later outcomes. Because, if you go on a bit, Jane, yeah, and the next one. Because it's a longitudinal study, it means that we can look at the effects of earlier participation on what happens to young people at 17. So we can see, and it's not surprising, that reading for pleasure does enhances young people's performance in vocabulary test scores, and it's also associated with higher grades in the junior cert. Taking music, drama, or dance lessons is also associated with higher junior cert grades, even when we take account of the more advantaged characteristics among that group. We find less evidence for non-cognitive outcomes like self-image or life satisfaction, but we do find greater life satisfaction among those who engage in music making and those who go to the cinema regularly. On the other hand, we find that those who spend a lot of time playing computer games, so be 3 or more hours per day, have poor outcomes across all of the domains we looked at. So they've lower exam grades, poorer life satisfaction, lower self-image, and greater socio-emotional difficulties. So just to conclude, what are the implications of this for policy? This provides an important evidence base for developing arts and cultural policy in relation to children and young people. But it points to a number of challenges in trying to make the arts fully inclusive, given the gender and background differences in participation that we have found. The findings show the importance of early involvement, but early involvement isn't sufficient to keep young people engaged. So we really need to bolster this engagement at this key transition phase of leaving school. Schools emerge as a really important domain for access to the arts and culture, but it seems that existing provision might reinforce gender and social differentiation in access to the arts. It's not surprising that schools want to provide the activities their students are interested in, but there is a risk of some stereotyping where boys and other groups may not get access to the arts and culture in the same way as other students. There's a particular challenge for smaller schools, and there's some potential there for cross-school cooperation perhaps, or for greater community provision in some areas where there are challenges for small schools in providing extracurricular activities. The findings importantly highlight the success of DEIS schools in bridging some of the gap that we see in cultural participation. There's been a good deal of focus in the last few years on reviewing the existing senior cycle. And the findings have implications for the future direction potentially of senior cycle. They add to the evidence of the need for an improved balance between formal and informal learning. These findings show that preparation for the Leaving Cert is serving to kind of drive out other activities and other parts of young people's development. And there is also a potential to kind of use short courses that have been suggested as a way of exposing a greater group and a greater diversity among young people in terms of access to arts and culture. Now, finally, it's important to note that these findings, this survey was collected before the pandemic. We don't have systematic evidence of the impact of the pandemic and associated restrictions on arts and cultural participation among young people. But it does appear that school closures are likely to have widened the gap in cultural participation because, for example, for young people in DEIS schools, their schools were playing a very important role in their access to culture, and school closure is likely to have impacted on that. There are also continued constraints around providing extracurricular arts and culture in a safe way in schools. So those activities have been constrained. And there is a real risk that this disruption will accelerate the decline in involvement that we're documenting here, except perhaps for digital culture, which will be more available to these young people, but it is likely to impact on their participation in more structured access to dance, music, and so on. And I'm sure Eoin will have something to say about that later on. Thank you very much, and apologies for the technical difficulties.
Great, thanks so much, Emer. Fantastic run through the material. Congratulations to you as ever for a fantastic report with amazing findings. It is a reminder again, isn't it, though, about the value of GUI. I don't mean this is a bilateral dialogue between you and me, but once again, that value of having the information at different points in time and being able to follow that, and then crucially here, picking up that transitions piece to know those other changes around certain times. Absolutely fantastic. So congratulations to you for that. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the webinar Maureen Kennelly. As said before, Maureen, of course, is the director of the Arts Council, and Maureen is going to give us some reflections on the study. So are you there, Maureen?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alan. It's great to be part of this today. Thank you so much. And we're absolutely delighted to be launching this important piece of research today with the ESRI. I want to say a huge thanks to Emer Smyth for her sterling work on it. Thanks to Alan and Jean as well for their part in today. And I want to say a special thanks to my colleague Shona Nibrian, who heads up our Young People, Children and Education Department. You may have heard her on Morning Ireland this morning, talking about this very report, in fact, and also to pay tribute to our colleagues Monica Corcoran and Toby Dennett. They're from our Strategic Development Department, who also had a great hand to play in that. So thanks to you all. But this is important, of course, because it provides us with an opportunity to consider young people's participation in the arts and to take stock about whether we're really doing enough as a society to support their participation. Young people have a right to participate in the arts and cultural life and to express themselves in the medium of their choice. And these rights are enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And again, they're reflected in the Declaration on Human Rights. The decline in participation that the research shows may not be surprising when we consider the busy schedules of young people preparing for their Leaving Cert, and I'm sure Eoin and Noon will talk to us later about that, or young people as they head into the world of work. But as a society, are we actually providing sufficient time, space and encouragement for young people to be inspired, to express themselves and to participate in our arts and cultural life at this very pivotal point in their lives? That's the question really this throws up for all of us. Despite the decline in participation, almost 1/4 of 17-year-olds had taken part in art, drama, dance or music clubs or in groups or rehearsals in the year prior to the survey. The research also shows that life satisfaction levels are higher where young people regularly make music, go to the cinema or are involved in those clubs or in those lessons, as Emer has shown. And we need to carefully consider how COVID-19 is impacting young people's access to these activities. That's something that very much occupies Shona's mind at the moment. The Growing Up in Ireland data provides provides information on young people taking up art and music in senior cycle, but this is just one part of the picture. Many art forms, as we've seen, are only available to young people as extracurricular activities, and these are currently seriously curtailed due to COVID-19. And for the cohort of young people who do participate in these activities and who gain such life satisfaction from them, how are they being impacted by the absence of these vital dimensions to their lives? For those who wish to go on to higher education in arts practices not fully catered for within the school curriculum, such as dance, what are the implications for their learning and development? We as the Arts Council have stated our priority within our strategy called Making Great Art Work, that strategy runs to 2025, to plan and provide for children and young people. And we do this, and we can only do this in partnership with others. Those others include artists, arts organisations, cultural institutions, the Department of Education and Skills, the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, and also with local authorities who are very important partners for us. We are all deeply committed to listening to the voices of young people as we develop and implement our own policies. And in fact, Eoin took some time out to be part of our Youth Voice focus group last week, which is fantastic. And as we collaborate strategically with other partners, I'm therefore delighted to be responding to the research today, along with young respondents, including Eoin O Loughlin and Noon Abubakar, who's aged 17. Eoin is aged 18 and has just moved to Dundee. Listening to young people helps us to think better and work better. And in the case of this research, listening to young people's lived experiences help us to understand what encourages participation and what prevents it. It will help us to find ways to ensure that everyone's included in and has a sense of belonging and ownership in our diverse cultural community, and how we can ensure better access to the arts in a way that can enable young people to reach their full potential. It's really positive, we believe, that in Ireland, young people's education services are being prioritised in the plan for living with COVID-19. And this priority extends to areas such as youth work and sport. But young people who rely on arts education outside of school or youth work settings have found some of these activities curtailed. And this has highlighted gaps in public provision in the area of arts education and services. For young people who find their voice and locate their safe space in the arts, and for those who wish to develop a career in this area and who rely on classes outside of school for training and education, this has presented difficulties, and that's an ongoing concern for us. The research answers some questions and it raises others, of course. What impact can we expect from the increase in online engagement for young people's activities during COVID-19? Do young people continue to reap the benefits of structured cultural activities in terms of their well-being, as well as cognitive development, when those activities move online? On the other hand, has the current year provided opportunities for young people to rediscover reading or time to learn to play an instrument? We'll continue to seek answers to those pressing questions with young people, especially those who are impacted. So now it gives me very great pleasure to introduce to you Noon Abubakar and Eoin O Loughlin, who will share their experiences of participation in the arts. Noon is 17 and Eoin is 18. Also, just to mention that we were to be joined by the spoken word poet Natalia O'Flaherty, but unfortunately she is ill. But we would encourage you to look up her work. You'll find her easily online. That's Natalia O'Flaherty. She's a terrific young artist. We're going to hear from Noon first in a pre-recorded piece, as our launch here today clashes with her school time. And after that, Eoin will join us from Dundee, as I said, to share some of his experiences. Eoin featured in that beautiful dance video made by Dublin Youth Dance Company that we showed at the top, and that was made during lockdown. We'll play it again at the end for anyone who's late joining. I think it was missing the music at the top, so we'll have music at the end. He is a first-year contemporary dance student in Dundee, which is something of a cathedral of dance, so he's certainly in the right place. And Noon is a member of County Wexford Youth Theatre. She came to our attention through a piece that she wrote in response to Black Lives Matter called Does My Life Matter? The full piece is available on YouTube. Again, we'd encourage you to watch it. It's a powerful piece. That piece, in fact, is a longitudinal study in itself, as it charts her experience of racism from an early age, and it reflects on her experiences. She's currently studying for her Leaving Cert. So we're now going to hear her contribution in response to today's research on arts and cultural participation. Welcome, Noon.
My name is Noon, I'm 17 and I'm Black. I moved from Sudan, a predominantly Black country in Africa, 4 years ago. That was the opening of a piece that I wrote back in June 2020 about Black Lives Matter and the effect of racism on my life. I don't think that that piece would have reached the scope that it did and been of the quality that it was without my involvement in the arts. When I moved, I definitely felt kind of the effects of now being the extreme minority, being different, not really meshing well with the culture at first, and like the culture shock that I went through. And the arts in general are really important because not only are they encouraging to diversity, but they welcome it. It's something that I feel like the arts needs. It kind of flourishes under the differences of people, and that's why youth theatre and drama was really important to me, because I felt like it was a place that I could belong to. I think that's an aspect of youth theatre I especially like, because I have been able to express so many of my views on being different with open minds listening and people wanting to learn and wanting to listen because they know as well that that's what the arts is about. There kind of needs to be more of an emphasis on the arts in schools. I think that it's very common knowledge in younger ages that the arts are important, and I know so many children that have been involved in the arts and so many of my friends' siblings that are involved in the arts. But I think that kind of disappears when you go into secondary school because of the like more extreme commitment you have to give for education. And I just think that it's so sad that people have to sacrifice the things that they enjoy for that, and that the arts aren't really deemed as something worthy of your time because they don't give you a future, even though they very well can. I think there's also the weird stigma surrounding the arts and doing the arts when you reach older ages. I don't think it's something people actively judge other people for, especially if they want to make a future out of it. I think it's something more internalized and underlying. If you have like a real enjoyment for the arts, or if you genuinely think that you can make a future out of it, there's always a small doubt because of something that society has told us, that the proper jobs are a doctor, an engineer and stuff like that, and not necessarily something to do with the arts. That's also another thing that I'm guilty of. I often find myself tearing down my abilities, especially if they're to do with drama or writing and stuff like that, even though they are things that I enjoy, because deep down I'm kind of thinking, but can I really make something out of that, even though I can? Even though there are a wide range of subjects to choose from for the Leaving Cert course, I don't personally think any of them is encouraging people enough to do the arts, except for obviously art, which is not something that I've personally taken, but I feel like there's just so much more that we could add. We could add dance, we could add theatre, and these are subjects that are offered in other education systems as well, so I don't really understand why they can't be offered in the one that we have now. Back in regards to Does My Life Matter, I don't think I would have necessarily been able to compose that piece the way I composed it without drama, or I wouldn't have been able to compose it with the same quality, because in our drama anyway, we made a lot of plays and it was a lot about structuring, and also the opinions that I presented in that piece. The reason I was able to do it so confidently was because I already have the confidence backed up from when I was able to do it in drama, from the welcoming atmosphere in drama, from the people that wanted to listen. And I've always personally been someone who was able to articulate what they wanted to say well, but I don't think I would have been able to have the courage in that articulation without being involved in youth theatre. And also the amount of people that watched it, I was able to have it professionally filmed and then screened at Wexford Arts Centre, and that's all thanks to my drama teacher, Tony McLean-Fay. The piece wouldn't have even gone beyond a small Instagram video without that. And that's why I think that arts are important, even if you're not necessarily considering it as a future, which I'm unfortunately not. You can still gain so much out of it in your life. My name is Noon, I'm 17, and I'm Black. There's a part of myself that can never feel confidence within myself because I am not white. I hear about racist attacks everywhere, including Ireland. I think about when my mother worked here 20 years ago, people refused to be treated by her. I think about how people look down on my father when he speaks to them in an accent that isn't as prim and proper, despite the fact that he is a respected doctor. I've been absorbing racist videos, racist stereotypes, racist comments, racist people, and racism for the past 17 years. People can absorb Black music, idolize Black artists, inhale Black culture, say that they're not racist even though they use the N-word and refuse to listen to anyone who tells them otherwise. But they can't fight for Black people? They don't have that decency? Funny. If you are silent during times of oppression, then you have taken the side of the oppressor. My name is Noon. I'm 17, and I'm Black. Does my life matter? And that was the closing of the piece, Does My Life Matter?, which I wrote in June 2020 regarding Black Lives Matter and the effect of racism on my life. That was the closing of something that I had the opportunity to do because I was able to find that confidence to use my voice in the arts. The arts, above all, is an outlet of expression. And what is more of a human right than being able to express yourself?
Hello. Hi, I'm Owen. I'm 17. I'm from Dublin, but I currently live in Dundee in Scotland, and I'm studying contemporary dance. I just have a couple of words to say, and then I'll pass it off. So I just want to thank you all so much for inviting me to this event. For the past couple of weeks now, I've been working with the Arts Council on young people's affairs, and I have to commend the work that they've done to kind of include young people at every stage and to make these seemingly quite drab and procedural things really transparent and as insightful as possible. So I'd really like to thank Emer Smyth, Shonan Irene, and Maureen Kennelly, who's here, for their assiduous and continued work on allowing young people to represent themselves as artists on this platform and elsewhere, and for being there to help me along with every step of the way. So thank you. In recent days, I've realized in various ways quite how privileged I am to be Irish. I truly believe creativity runs through our very veins and is the lifeblood of our country. From the fairly creative stories one might hear down at the pub, I'll call it our oral tradition, to the street art in Ringsend, to our pipers in the West. I do believe that we have a gift, a magic, and that magic lies with everyone who comes here. Whether you're born here or not, that magic lies within the possibility, the innovation of our youth. That magic goes to the people who see our work, who listen to us speak, to those who nurtured us from the beginning, and to those who nurture our professional careers down the line. Thank you. I've always participated in the arts, and I think most arts are experienced through the lens of our teachers. My teachers have shaped who I am today, even if every experience wasn't positive. It molded me, it moved me. Each correction, each demonstration planted within me a lesson to be later deciphered. And I learned the importance of simple hard work and grit and determination. I learned what happens when a love of art is nurtured and not forced. I learned what happens to our complex questions, to our future problems, and that they're most commonly found in the past. I learned that people, no matter where they're from, often have more similarities than differences. And I even learned how to point my toes, which is quite important, I suppose. Each lesson brought me to where I am today, and I'm heartened to see that despite our distance, despite a global pandemic, we can still learn these lessons, maintain the magic, empower young people, and however hard it may feel, one day this pandemic will be over and we will be together again, hopefully doing stuff like this. We don't stop here, we carry the mantle forward. We don't stop here, we keep improving that cultural participation for 17-year-olds and for young people as a whole, because that's what keeps that magic going. And, you know, I think that perhaps including and integrating kind of cultural participation in our educational system, in our Leaving Cert, as they do here in Scotland, is the way to go. So that's what I have to say in anyways. It's been a beautiful and insightful month working with these amazing people. And I just want to thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of it. I now know how much work truly goes into what you guys do, and help me realize how privileged I am. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Owen, and thanks to Noon before that. That was a fantastic contribution, I have to say. So again, sincere thanks to you guys for being part of this. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes for some questions and answers. So the questions are coming in already. So I'm going to do my best to ask Emer the questions. And Maureen, if you feel the need to contribute to any of these points, you're more than welcome to contribute as well. So Emer, the first thing is one of those classic questions where you've done such an interesting study that somebody asks you the question about what else you should have been doing. So the question is, so arts and creativity play a large role in the well-being of the individual, and then what other supports can schools and youth organizations use to support well-being projects? So I'm sure that's something you've thought about in other strands of work.
We have, and actually I've been doing a lot of work with Anne Nolan that will be relevant here. We've looked at what schools can do to promote health, so physical activity, and not engaging in risky behaviour. We've looked at the role of schools in sex education. So, I mean, I think there's been a really good shift in school policy and educational policy towards recognising the importance of well-being, especially at junior cycle. I think there's potential to do more at senior cycle in terms of promoting well-being and life skills, especially given some of the stress levels around preparation for the Leaving Cert. But I think Noon and Owen have done a far better job than I ever could in showing what arts means in terms of making you a complete human being, in terms of human flourishing, really, if I can use a very grandiose term. And I think they've made it very clear that arts and culture are a really crucial part of our identity, and that should be supported as part of well-being in schools.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, actually, because clearly the link with well-being is there in the data, but yeah, nothing like actually sort of hearing it from the folks themselves. It's another interesting question, and I think it's one certainly that was in my mind, and it's the question of the extent to which arts and sports compete for kids' time. And again, I think Noon may have touched on this idea that especially with busy secondary school lives, that there are so many sort of competing demands that, is it the case that you can only do so much? So is there evidence of this, of the conflicting sports?
Well, actually, it's interesting because we see that, again, using Growing Up in Ireland data, we see a quite significant drop in participation in organised sports as well between 13 and 17. So sports may be competing for some groups, but they're also losing out. And I think it is partly because young people become less inclined to kind of be involved in structured things. But there's no doubt from the patterns we see that the Leaving Cert and the pressures to prepare to it are driving out other things. And in terms of, the investment of time in homework and study isn't allowing for much other activity during the week. So that's certainly playing a part. But also, sport, while there will be some participation among younger women at younger ages, we do see that the patterns in terms of gender are reversed for sport. So you can see how female arts and culture are and how male sport is.
Can I follow up with a question actually of my own? And it's I know it's a real Irish thing to use every opportunity to sort of complain about the Leaving Cert and stuff like that. So I'm gonna run with it. But here's the serious question. Internationally, is there evidence that it's the transition that matters? Okay, so as you move from primary to secondary school and then say secondary into college, that transitions lead to falls off in certain activities. And is it the transition or is it really the Leaving Cert? And that's why I'm wondering, are there other countries that don't have the pressure cooker of Leaving Cert? Do they observe these sort of falls in participation in certain activities?
That's a very good question. In fact, I think there's very little information longitudinally on cultural participation internationally. It's quite a gap. But I think the transition matters because it changes the context young people are living in. You know what I mean? I mean, Eoin is living in a different country, his different peer group and so on, to take an example. But the Leaving Cert year matters itself. We do see a shift between 5th and 6th year. So that change has already happened within the school system. So it's a bit of both, really.
Okay. Quick question. Were you able to look at migrant young people versus their Irish peers?
Yes, and what was interesting is at 17, we see that there are no significant differences when we take account of other factors. Whereas at 9, we saw that young people from migrant backgrounds were much less likely to take part in structured cultural activities like arts or art classes, music lessons and so on. And that seemed to be 2 factors, because it was even lower for those who were from non-English speaking backgrounds. So there seemed to be a language barrier at that stage. And this would have been kind of the early stages of migration expansion in Ireland. And also it seems to be a bit about kind of, if you like, social capital. So the migrant parents wouldn't have known, had the same insider knowledge of, what clubs were out there, what, how extracurricular school activities the school go, for example. But that gap narrows over time. Now it narrows in not a very positive way. We find that migrant young people are actually maintaining their involvement at a better level on average, but that young people from kind of Irish backgrounds are declining, and that's why the gap narrows.
Okay. The next question, actually, both Maureen and Eoin might have a view on this, and I'm going to read this one out, actually, because it's nicely phrased. So, is individual participation, obviously in the arts, affected by type of housing or number of people in the household? Okay, and here's the bit of colour. Such as room for a piano, okay, are not being throttled for keeping your household or your neighbours awake by murdering a violin. Okay, so it's quite a colourful way of putting but I think it is actually interesting, and I guess we all became more conscious of this in the COVID period, the extent to which your housing circumstances really can act as a constraint on the sort of things you can participate in or not. So Eoin or Maureen, both of you are welcome to offer a view on that question.
Sure, well, I start. I think that, type of housing is definitely a fairly significant factor in at least my participation of the arts, even right now, from a sedentary position in Scotland. I do live in a flat, which is quite space restrictive, and I do have to do all of my classes online, which is quite difficult. And I think I can vouch for a couple of my friends that during the COVID pandemic, participation and kind of engagement with, for example, dance became very, very strained and difficult during this time, because of constraints of space. So I think that certainly people with larger housing and more space, larger gardens, for example, would certainly flourish in times like this, while others may not. But that's just what I say.
Okay. And Maureen, you may want to add to that, but there's another question I do want to put to you as well. And again, it's very well put. So most people at this talk are engaged or interested in the arts. Okay, so maybe there's a bit of a preaching to the convert, whatever it is. But how do you promote the value of arts in our schools in general? So you can say a little bit about the housing one if you want, but if you want to give a view on that other question, I'd be interested.
Yeah. Well, on the housing one, I mean, it chimes back to what Emer is showing us about the extracurricular activity, that it's for those who are better off, and that often for something like dance, in fact, and for music, it's only to access to private tuition that young people can actually access those art forms. So I think, obviously, size of housing then has an impact on that status. So I think that certainly that would have a bearing. And it's very interesting to hear what Eoin had to say too in that regard. And then, I suppose that's something that we tussle with in the Arts Council every single day. How can we get outside preaching to the converted? And my colleague Monica Corcoran, whom I mentioned earlier, is leading out on our equality, human rights and diversity policy. And that's a core policy for the Arts Council that's whereby we very much want to see who are we not involving in our work, because, you know, I suppose we all do have an impression of who are those who have been better served by the arts for the last sort of 70 years. We turn 70 next year. So, you know, who have we particularly been able to address? And we very much want to break outside that, to open the gates wider, to say people who have been marginalized and who have felt excluded from arts activity, we very much want to open those gates wide for them. We're very much hooked on the idea that until we fully reflect the diversity of Irish life, we can't fully achieve our function as an arts council. So, and education, of course, is a very, very important channel to doing all that. So the earlier we start, the better that we're going to be able to achieve our mission. And that's why a study like this is just so important, because it's that longitudinal aspect to be able to trace people. What are the actual factors over a span of 10, 12 years that are actually impacting on people's participation? So that's why we particularly welcome today. It's a really rich piece of research, and it's only by doing more research in this area that we'll fully come to realise what are the barriers for people. So we have increased investment from the government. We're very much going to be directing that particularly towards young people and children, and also towards those who have felt outside the gates of the arts in past decades.
Okay, thanks for that. Emer, I've got a couple of questions have come in, and I'm smiling actually, because this is almost like you're to summarize 20 years of your work in 30 seconds. But it's indeed, it's the question of how do you sort of alter the Leaving Cert? Okay, and somebody again has described, you know, the high stakes exam, to allow it to sort of capture and, you know, allow people to do some of the things that we're talking about today. And how can it be done in a positive way, okay, to sort of basically reduce the stress and allow people to carry on doing the things that are stress reducing, but more importantly are also developmentally really, really important. And I think somebody has a phrase here, you know, if you think about sort of skills for the 21st century, you know, and again, Owen and Noon touched on these sort of things. Isn't there a host of skills in there that we're really squeezing out? But anyway, I know you've given a lot of thought to this over the years.
Yeah.
So
it's a big question, but I think, you know, a lot of these ideas have been rehearsed in the recent senior cycle review being conducted by the National Council for Curriculum Assessment, the NCCA. So I think there are two aspects. I think one is about content and one is about assessment. I think in terms of content, we are quite academic focused. So we're not really catering for young people who are more vocational or creative tendencies and potential. I think Owen said very well, there are whole areas of knowledge that we can't take at upper secondary in Ireland. And that certainly came up in the consultation with young people in the senior cycle review, that things like drama were raised as a gap, if you like. And I think, you know, if this idea of short courses comes about, I think, you know, even if a school wouldn't have the numbers or the kind of specialist skills to provide a full Leaving Cert dance program, they might be able to provide a short course so that young people would have some exposure to those ideas. You know what I mean? If you've never seen it, how can you know you want to be a dancer or you want to pursue another avenue in the arts? And I think the second issue is assessment. And I think there was quite a consensus in the consultation, even with teachers, parents and young people, about kind of spacing out the assessment so that it's not an all or nothing exam at the end of the period. And I think we do have to really think seriously about the balance between formal and informal learning and the kind of creative skills, but life skills as well. Young people are leaving school feeling that they haven't learned to appreciate reading for pleasure so much. They haven't really learned an appreciation of art and culture, but they don't really feel prepared for adult life. And, you know, I remember in one of the focus groups, one young person said, I thought it captured a multitude, you know, this year I have to put up my hand to go to the bathroom, but next year I'll have to go into a bank to ask for a loan. And I think we're not, you know, doing young people any favors by having a very hierarchical system that squeezes out some skills.
Owen, do you want to comment on that at all, since this is closer to your world than ours?
Certainly. I think that's really poignant what Emer said. You know, applying for a bank account, moving country, they're not exactly things that I was prepared for actually moving. And I was expecting to be prepared for it, considering how academic the system is, you know. I can make a comparative study between Shakespearean texts, but I can't really, you know, I didn't really know how to do my taxes, for example, or, you know, it's an odd system that we have, unfortunately, and I think it could definitely be improved on, and it is, but, you know, there's a lot of work to be done for sure.
Very good. We'll invite you back to the next ESRI webinar on tax-related matters to make up for that gap in your education.
Oh,
You'll
thank you so
really,
much.
I was going to say, you'll really appreciate when we submerge you. We've got just another couple of minutes, and there is another question I really do want to get to. So Emer, I'll read it out. So in my experience, it can be difficult to get non-DEIS schools to engage in the arts due to financial constraints and not wanting to ask parents for money for tickets. Did this come up in your study? So I know there were findings there on DEIS related schools, and I just think that's a really interesting one for those sort of schools that I guess fall, you know, between that gap. They're not DEIS, but maybe they're, you know, the parent group isn't as wealthy as elsewhere. So is there a missing?
It's a very good point, and it didn't come up directly. I mean, it would be nice to be able to do further research where we looked at the kind of you know, what lies behind the patterns at school level, like why are schools not providing certain activities, and that's something that should be looked at. But might take the chance to highlight once again the findings around transition year and how those who had taken part in transition year are more likely to study art and music as a curriculum subject, but also more likely to engage in culture outside school. So there seems to be a really a great opportunity for engagement with the arts through transition year. Now, unfortunately, not all students take it, and it tends to be the more disadvantaged groups who don't. But I can't answer the question directly, but it's an interesting one.
Okay, listen, we might just take one more question, and the question is directed to Emer, but with your permission, Maureen, I'm going to direct it to you, if that's okay. And if I put you in an awkward position, don't be afraid to say. But I wasn't aware of this, but the person is the questioner, Sandra Ryan, is talking about the proposal to reduce the amount of time devoted to arts education from 12 hours per month to 8 hours per month in primary schools. And Sandra's making the point that this reduction in arts time obviously is sort of contrary or counter to the findings of this report. So I don't know, is that Emer or Maureen, are you familiar with this policy, this proposal?
I'm not familiar with that. I know Shona's obviously on the call, and Shona might want to come in if she has any further information on that. But just to say, obviously, that's very concerning. You know, because those involved in the whole area of arts and education have spent several decades working to enmesh the fields more together, and the disruption caused by COVID has been, you know, was very, very disruptive. And I suppose schools, as we say, have now been supported through COVID, but it's harder. I think what we're finding on the ground is that it's harder to get arts back in there, you know. So if they're to be actually structurally reduced like that, that is certainly a worry, you know. And I mean, as we talked about, you know, digital education, we don't know yet how beneficial that's going to be. On the one hand, obviously it can reach many more people, but, you know, the actual kind of worth and impact of it, we don't know about that yet, you know. So
yeah, one to watch anyway, but I was eager to get that. Listen, we said we would finish at 4:05, and we've drifted ever so slightly over. But I'm always conscious when people log on to calls that they all have busy lives and sort of maybe moving on to do other things. So I don't want to detain people too much longer. So just to once again thank Eoin and Noon, thank Emer for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Maureen, for your presentation today, but also, of course, for supporting the work and the sort of really positive engagement with the work. We really do appreciate it, and it's been kind of fun for the ESRI to link up with the Arts Council in this way and to sort of explore these issues. Very, very much enjoyed it all in all.